Our God seated on the throne. That means he's a king. That means he is sovereign. That means that he is all-powerful, that he makes the law. He is the law. He is the one who says what's right and what's wrong. He is the one that we say yes to. When he says do this, we say yes, Lord, yes. Anyway, we're supposed to, right? But we don't always do that. Sometimes we have problems. And we don't always follow him like he asks us to, like we should, to follow our King who sits on the throne, highly exalted, the one that we adore. Sometimes we have trouble, and part of it is our words. We've been talking about word problems, that we have problems with our words, and you don't have to look around very far to find out that that's true. My goodness, the political debates today alone, I can't wait for November to be here and gone. The problem is, it won't end there. It continues with every one of us, doesn't it? We struggle with word problems, with the way we say things, with the words that we use. We know that we should talk one way, but we talk another way. And I just want to remind you that we're not talking today about those politicians and those candidates. And we're not talking about the people in our workplace. And we're not talking about those people over there or those people over there. We're talking about who? We're talking about us. We're talking about me. What do my words say? I can't control what anybody else says. I have a hard time controlling what I say. But I must. I'm the only one who can. And so we're talking about us today. What about our word problems? We talked about the problem of power. We don't often realize the power that our words hold. We went to Proverbs chapter 18, 21, and we've kind of I based kind of this thought about the power of our words when the writer says that the tongue has the power of life and death. And those who love it will eat its fruit. Those words, they say that our words have, see, I can't even talk. We have words. Our words can create healing or they can create destruction, depending on what words we use, how we say them, the tone of our words, the words we choose. James says that our tongue is an evil that's set among our members, and it's set on fire by hell itself. We have a hard time controlling our tongue, but we must control it because it wields great power. You remember, even as a child, I'm sure, somebody saying something to you that still is with you today. Or maybe a word that was withheld that you needed to hear. There's power in words. We realized that our words come from someplace, though, that we have a storage problem. Jesus said that the mouth speaks what the heart stores. And so the things that come out, the way I speak, is really an indication of what's in my heart, right? That's what Jesus said. He said, so we need to be careful about the things that we store and what we put in our heart, because that's what the mouth speaks. But you know, there are things stored in my heart already that are dark, that are harsh. And if my mouth is going to speak what's stored in my heart, sometimes I need some sort of filter to catch those words before they get out. Some people don't have a filter. They just speak whatever they think. And that leads to terrible things. That's often not a loving way to deal with people. And so we need a filter over our mouths. And Jesus says, or James said, no one can control the tongue. Nobody can do it. And if that's the case, how do I filter what I speak? David said it this way. He said, he went to the Lord and he said, God, I need you to set a guard over my mouth. He says, Lord, keep watch over the door of my lips. David realized he couldn't control his tongue. We can't control our tongues either. So who do we rely on to control our tongues? We rely on God. We rely on the Holy Spirit. And the Spirit leads us. The Spirit will tell us, you probably shouldn't say that. And we know that in the back of our minds. We go, oh, that's right, that's right. And then we say it anyway. But if we're listening to the Spirit, if we're paying attention, we won't. We'll go, yeah, that probably won't sound too good. That won't be encouraging. That won't build this person up. It won't be necessary for this person. It won't be godly or loving. And if we listen to the Spirit and we obey the Spirit and we clamp our teeth down and say, I will not say that even though I want to, then God is honored. And he puts a filter over our words. But sometimes our filters are broken. And we don't always listen to the Spirit. We don't always obey the Spirit. We don't always follow that filter he wants to put over our mouths to make our speech kind and loving and encouraging. We need to learn to listen to that Spirit because he's the only one who can stop those words and help us with our word problems. But if this heart stores things that are impure, if the heart stores stuff that's going to come out in a bad way, wouldn't it be nice if we could just take that heart and purify it and get rid of all that bad stuff? Wouldn't that be nice? The problem is it sticks in there tight. It hangs on. Once you let something in, it doesn't want to leave. But I'm here today to tell you, I think there's a way that we can purify our hearts. I think we have a purity problem. We've let a lot of dark things into our hearts, into our minds. But God is powerful. He can not only forgive our sin, I believe that he can purify our hearts. John said it this way. He says, how great a love the Father has lavished on us that we should be called children of God, and that is what we are. And then he says, everybody who has this hope in himself, this hope in God, purifies himself just as God is pure. And I want to think, wait a minute. I don't think I can do that. That's more than I'm capable of. How do you take all that stuff in there and get rid of it? We're going to look at something today that gives us great hope. We love cleanliness. We love purity. We love our environment. We like to keep it clean. We vacuum our carpets. We wash our hands. We clean our windows. We clean up the beaches. We like to heal the bay and make sure we pick up all the trash. We don't leave trash on the beaches. I don't know if you've got this. We've got, every week, there's this big machine that comes down our street and sweeps our street. Have you seen one of those? It's amazing, isn't it? I love that we live in a place where we have street sweepers because I've seen places that don't. And the trash piles up. And it's horrible. But we pay taxes to have these guys sweep our streets. People in other places of the world look at us and say, you are crazy. But I like that things are clean. I love a highway sign that they have in Texas. It says, don't mess with Texas. And what they're saying is, don't throw your trash out the window while you're driving down the highway. Take some care. Keep this place pure. I love that. Have you ever gotten a bottle of water and it's kind of dingy looking? What do you do with that water? You pour it out, don't you? You said, no, thank you. There's something beautiful about pure water, especially in the sunshine. It kind of sparkles, and it's refreshing. But you get that cup or that bottle, or it comes out of the tap, and it's a little brown. Have you had that? Whew. Pour that out. We love purity around us. We work our bodies out. We go to the gym. We eat good foods. We eat vegetables and all that stuff that you have to develop a liking for, right? Because it's good for us. It keeps our bodies pure. Anybody in here ever gone through a detox regimen? Yeah. Why would you do that? because you want to get rid of the toxins in your body, right? Is it fun to go through a detox regimen? No, it's not. It's terrible. You have to deny yourself of all kinds of things. You have to eat things, drink things that you wouldn't normally do. But it's because we want our bodies to be healthy. But for some reason, we don't always apply that to our spirit. For some reason, we think that somehow spirituality and godliness will just osmose into us. It'll just soak in. We'll just get that way. It'll just happen for us, right? And so we don't go through detox regimens. We don't focus on going to the gym. We don't spend time in the Word. We don't do the things that would create a pure and a strong spiritual body. We spend a lot of time cleaning up the beach. What if we spent that time purifying our minds? I think, next picture here, I think is a picture of some children I told you about. These kids in Vietnam, every Sunday, every week, they go home and they pick out a passage of the Bible to memorize that week. Not a verse, a passage, a long passage. And every week they stand before the congregation and recite the passages they memorized for that week. And one of the fathers told me, he said, our children memorize the word so they have it in them when they go to prison. They know, they expect hardship. They expect to go to prison. It's not if, it's when you go to prison because of your faith, because it's illegal in that part of the world. And these children are putting words in their heart from God. So take God's word for them. It doesn't just happen by osmosis. It happens because they're intentional of hiding God's word in their heart so that they will be able to stand when the fires come. I love that intentionality. It was so powerful to see them knowing we'd be fighting tooth and nail. My kids go to prison? I don't think so. We have rights, don't we? Well, guess how quickly your rights can be taken away? Just like that. And these people knew that they were in war. There's not an actual war going on in Vietnam right now, but there is warfare nonetheless. Are we in a war here? Yes. Absolutely. God says that Satan is seeking his victims, the ones that he can devour, the ones he can destroy. He is not sitting back and just being idle. He is actively looking for each one of us and where he can get to us. And part of the problem, part of the tool he uses is by planting that impurity in our minds so that what we think and what we say is not godly. And so we have a purity problem. And sometimes we think that we can just filter some things out, but our filters break. But our filters don't always control what we actually think. They don't control what we actually feel. Our filters don't change what's inside. They just stop some of it from coming out. And here's what Paul said to the Colossian church. In chapter 2, he said, you guys are following all kinds of rules in the church. You are following all kinds of rules that you think will make you healthy and pure and spiritual. But he says this, he says, these rules, which have to do with the things that are all destined to perish with use, they're based merely on human commands and teachings. They were going to church, they were going to temple, they were offering sacrifices, they were giving their tithes, they were doing all the things. But he says, such regulations indeed have an appearance of wisdom, with their self-imposed worship, their false humility, and their harsh treatment of the body. He says, but they lack any value in restraining sensual indulgence. He says, go to church as much as you can. But understand, that's not the answer. There's something deeper that needs to happen to purify what's stored in our hearts. Do you ever get a song in your head that you couldn't get rid of? And usually it's just a piece of a song, right? It's not the whole song. It's just like one phrase. And you don't know the words to the rest of the song. It just keeps going over your head over and over. And you find yourself humming it, and pretty soon everybody else is humming it, and everybody else is mad at you because you got it stuck in their heads too. And you can't get rid of it until you do what? What do you have to do? You have to put something else in. You have to replace it, or else it just keeps running over and over in your head. So the same thing with the purity of our hearts. The impure thoughts, the impure things that are stored in our hearts just sit there, and they keep running around, and we have to keep filtering our words until we replace it with something that's pure. You take that cup of dingy water, you pour enough pure water in there, and pretty soon it becomes drinkable. It starts purifying it. I want to share with you some things that Paul told us can help purify those hearts and change things. In Philippians chapter 4, we see this verse where he says, finally. Finally means that he's already said a lot of things. And he said things like, you need to have the same heart, the same spirit that Jesus had, that of sacrificing yourself for the good of other people, of counting the needs of others as more important than your own. He talked about the fact that all the things that he had, all the things the world says was valuable, he counted as rubbish for the sake of knowing the Lord. He said, it's more important for me to know God than to have all these accolades from the world. It's most important that I know the power of his salvation. I even want to participate in his suffering because it's that important to know him. And after saying all these things, he gets down to verse 8 in chapter 4. He says, now finally, he says, do this. And I don't know, we had at a church I worked, we had a staff counselor, psychologist. And he said, Doug, everything that psychology teaches is bound up in this 1-2 verses. They don't say it comes from the Bible, but this is it. This changes a person from the inside out. If they can get people to do this, if a psychologist, a counselor can get people to do this, it solves 99% of their problems. Here's the purity pill. He says this. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. That's the way the NIV translates it. Think about such things. The New American Standard says, let your mind dwell on these things. In other words, let it live on these things. And I just want to go through this verse a little bit and unpack it just a little bit so we understand what he's talking about. First off, he starts off with truth. Whatever is true. And Paul starts with this in Ephesians 6, when he talks about the armor of God. What is the first piece of armor you put on? The belt of truth. Because we believe a lot of lies. We hear lies, and for some reason we are drawn to them and we believe them. There are words that have branded us from the time that we were children. You can think back, I'm sure, and remember things that were said to you, things that were implied to you. Maybe they weren't actually said, but maybe you were treated in such a way, and it formed an identity in you that you have a hard time escaping today, but that identity was not true. Where do we get our real, true identity from? We get it from the maker of life. Rich Mullins sang a song, it's called The Maker of Noses. I love one of my favorite songs. He says, I tried to find which way to go in the world, and some people said, well, just follow your nose. He said, but when I did that, I found that my direction changed every time I turned my head. It was not consistent. He said, well, follow your heart. He said, but my heart's just full of misty notions. It's wishing this and it's hoping for that. It's not consistent. So he decided to follow the maker of noses and the giver of dreams, what was based in truth and not in my own wants and wishes. or what somebody else said. We have feelings that persist, feelings that are hard to get rid of. You say, well, I don't feel like doing this, or I don't feel that that's right, or I don't feel that somebody should do this, or I don't feel that somebody shouldn't do that, or I don't feel like I'm worthwhile, or I don't feel like people love me, or I don't feel like I'm included. And we have all these feelings, and we follow our feelings. And that's what he's saying about following my heart. It's full of feelings that can be led astray so easily apart from the truth. Then culture. Our culture presses in on us. And it says, this is the way to live. This is what's right. This is what's good. This is what's true. James said that pure religion and undefiled is to visit the orphans and the widows, to care for them, and to keep yourself, do you remember what it said? To keep yourself unpolluted by the world. Unpolluted by what culture says to us. We need to be very careful that we don't believe the lies of our culture. How do you not do that? Because culture is so pervasive. And I'm saying, I promise you, you will follow culture if you don't replace it with something else. If you don't replace it with truth, if you don't hold tightly to what is true, then culture will lead us around by the nose. And we won't even know it. Because we'll start believing that this is what is true, this is what is right, this is what everybody else is doing, and I feel so good about that, or I feel so bad about that, instead of hanging on to what's true. We believe all kinds of lies that come to us. We believe things that we expect of other people. They should be this way, they should be that way, they shouldn't do this, and we get deflected off of ourselves, and we're worried about them and what they do, instead of looking what's true in my heart. And then sometimes we look at ourselves and we realize we are not all that good. And then we beat ourselves up and we ignore the truth that God told us. Who are we as God's people? He calls us children, heirs. He calls us great terms. Truth doesn't depend on these feelings. Here's what truth is. Truth is this. One, God is. Genesis 1:1 says what? In the beginning, God created. He made this place. God is, and God created. He made this world to work in a certain way, and it works according to God's plan, and He made it perfect. We came in and we've messed it up. We continue to mess it up. And different things, even diseases started around the world that wasn't here before. The truth is that God is, and that God created this world for a purpose. He wasn't just lonely. He wasn't bored one day. He said, I think I'll make a world that costs the life of my son. He didn't just arbitrarily choose that. He created us with a purpose. And if the Creator creates me with a purpose, I want to know what that is, don't you? I want to know if I'm fitting into His purpose or just following the lies of my culture. The truth is that God loves. Well, then where is God when the hard things happen? If God is so loving, where is He when the hard things happen? Mark Stringer was just telling me that his son's best friend had a 16-year-old son who just committed suicide this week. Where is God in that? And the problem is that God is not. God was left out of there. There was no hope. You don't kill yourself when you have hope. But this young man had no hope in his life. It was taken from him somehow because he was fed a lie and he believed it instead of holding on to the truth. God has proven His love to us in His patience, His mercy, His sacrifice to us. And that's what we need to remember. Truth is, God sacrificed His Son. He gave His Son. Here's what Paul says in Romans 5. He says, here's love, not that you were so good, but while you were still sinners, God sent His Son to die for you. If God loves us that much, why would we ever doubt that he's got our best interest at heart? But I forget that. I get tied up in the busyness of the day, and I start believing the lies that are so prevalent around me and the culture that presses in. And so I have to do some mental notes and remember the truth. God gave his son for me. Well, I don't feel like I'm worthy of that. Well, bingo, you're not. You're not that good. You don't deserve it. That's why Paul said, here's what love is. Not that you deserved it, but that God gave it. God sacrifices for ourselves, and God promises to us. And he's faithful to his promises. He is a promise keeper. He says, I am coming back to take you to be with me. He says, I will be with you always. I will put my spirit in your hearts. I will live among you. I will never leave you as orphans. I will not leave you alone. I will then physically come back and take you. We have a home that's guaranteed to us. That's the truth. And it's not this one. And if we forget that for a moment, then we fall prey to the lies that Satan gives to us. Feelings are not what truth is all about. But we get caught up in feelings. But you know what happens to a pilot who gets caught up in feelings? He crashes his airplane. There's a situation where they get disoriented when they're flying in cloudy conditions where they can't see the horizon. And their ears play tricks on them, and they think they're turning when they're actually in level flight, and so they'll turn the plane, and it doesn't fix it, so they turn it more, and pretty soon they're in a spiral dive, and they die. That happens frequently when a pilot gets spatially disoriented because he trusts his feelings. What is the pilot supposed to trust? The truth that's represented in those instruments. You're not turning. You're straight and level. Yeah, but it feels like I'm... Look at the truth. We need to come back to the truth, regardless of what we feel, and let the truth then influence our feelings. Paul says, think on the things that are true. He says, think on the things that are noble. Think on the things that are above the common, base, natural human instinct. Think on the things that are higher, the things that are more valuable in life, things that are higher than this natural central base unit that we usually operate off of. God doesn't call us to be normal, natural people. He calls us to be supernatural. He calls us to be filled with his Spirit, to do things that only he can do through us, not to be just plain people. He calls us to nobility, to do things that are higher. He calls us to focus on what is right. Have you ever told somebody, just do the right thing? Well, what is the right thing? What does that mean? Well, I'm just going to do the right thing. Right comes from a value system that's set by somebody that's bigger than us. It was at Nuremberg after World War II that the Germans defended, the Nazis defended themselves, defended the murdering, the mass slaughter of tens of millions of people by saying, well, that's our culture. It's right for us. It might not be right for you, but it's right for us. And at the trial, the world stood up and said, no, there is right and there is wrong. We don't care about your culture. This was wrong. Now, the court didn't know it, but what they did is they pronounced the existence of God in that decision. They said there is a system of right and wrong that is above us. We get our system of right and wrong that applies to all people in every time, in every culture, in every place. It is consistent. There is right and there is wrong. And Jesus tells us, Paul tells us, think on what is right. Think of what is godly. What would God do in this situation? What is good? And here's what Jesus says. He said it really boils down to something simple. You love people the way you love yourself. You treat each other the way you would like to be treated. He says it's not rocket science. If you want to be treated with respect, then respect other people. You want to be dealt with fairly, then be fair to other people. Give them a break. Give them patience. Do you want to be treated with patience? You be patient. You be like God made you. He made us with all these wants and desires. And some people say, well, we just know what's right. Everybody knows what's right. Not everybody does. But kind of they do. God planted something inside of us that we can kind of figure out, is this right or is this wrong? Would this make God happy or would this make God sad? Would this be the way I want to be treated or not? He says, think on the things that are right. He says, think about the things that are pure. We like that pure glass of water, don't we? That's beautiful. Not the polluted one, not the brown water. That's disgusting. And yet we deal with that and we accept that sometimes in our hearts and our minds. We deal with the impurities. Matter of fact, a lot of times being pure is embarrassing. I don't ever want to be accused of being naive. I want to be in the know. I want to know what people do. I want to know all the terms. I don't want to be caught not knowing what's going on, right? And so I let all this stuff inside. And I'm drinking the brown water. And I'm kind of proud of it. Because I know all this stuff. You see how it gets into us? We wouldn't consciously do that, but we're doing it. We have to say no to the brown water and say yes to the pure water. There was it's a term. Builders of sculptures, they would make different sculptures. They would make copies of their sculptures. And some of them had flaws in them. And they'd come to sell it. They would take wax and they'd fill in the flaws of their sculpture with this wax. And then when they would sell them, and the buyer would say, well, is this sincere? The word sincere means without wax. It means, is it pure? Is it covered with wax to fill in the impurities? Is it just hiding something that later is going to dry and crack and fall out? Or is it sincere? Is it really what I'm getting? We need to be people who are pure, who are sincere without wax. That what you see is what you get. That's what he calls us to. Think about purity. And we need to think about the things that come into our hearts. We watched a movie. Julie and I watched a movie before we had children. The movie came out, and some of you probably remember, called City Slickers. Anybody seen that movie? Hilarious. We laughed. This movie was so funny, we couldn't wait to share it with Julie's mom and dad. So we went down and rented it, got the old VHS tape, stuck it in the machine. We sat there in their den watching that movie, expecting to laugh. And then when in their presence, we heard it differently. And we were embarrassed. We wanted to shut it off, go, we didn't watch that movie. We didn't. And some of you are thinking, what? What was the problem with that movie? There were no sex scenes in that movie. Nobody murdered anybody anyway. The language, when we were sitting in the presence of her parents, curled our toes. And it made me think, why didn't that bother me before? And I need to ask myself that. Am I so content drinking the brown water that doesn't bother me anymore? I need to think on what's true. I need to think on what's pure. I need to think on what's lovely, he says. Look for beauty where you go. Look for beauty in people. Look for beauty in creation. It is all around us, but sometimes we miss it. It's so easy to focus on the one thing that's wrong. It's called the broken tile syndrome. They say you can have a whole wall or a floor that's covered with all this perfect tile except for one. There's a chip out of that one. Guess where your eyes go? To the chip. We see the one broken piece out of this whole beautiful ocean of tile, and we see the one that's broken. Why do we do that? He says, focus on the things that are lovely. Look for the things that are beautiful. Look on the things that are admirable, the things you admire in other people. Think about the things that you could do that other people would be proud of. Think on things that are excellent, going the extra mile, not settling for mediocrity, not settling for just good enough, but going the extra mile to say, God can be proud of things that are excellent, that I work hard on. Does it mean I need to be perfect? I will never be there. And sometimes I drive people crazy because I think things should be excellent, should be perfect, but they're never going to be. But I need to strive for excellence. Think on the things that are praiseworthy. I love this question. Would your mother be proud of what you're doing? Would your mother be proud of what you're saying? Would your mother be proud of what you're reading, what you're looking at, what you're doing? Oh, don't tell my mom about this. Why? Well, because it's not praiseworthy. What are the things that are good? We struggle with impurity. We have a purity problem, but if we replace the impurities with these things, Paul says, then the peace of God will be with you. We purify that storage tank with the good things, with the right things, with the true things, with the strong things, the things that will last. And God says the God of peace will be with you. The peace that surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. We turn to him. We fill our tanks with his truth. His truth is that he loves you. His truth, the truth is, I have failed. The truth is that he called me to perfection, but I'm far from that. Every one of us are, right? The truth is that Jesus did come, that God did sacrifice his son, that the requirement of sin, the wages I earned when I sinned, was death. It was separation from God forever, and Jesus died in my place. He paid the price for my sin by suffering and dying. When he was perfect, he didn't have to. But what Jesus says is that the righteous requirement of the law was met in us through him. He paid the price so we can stand pure before God. The thing we have to do is accept that gift, to put our faith in him and say, I'm done with the lies of this world. I want to follow in the truth and the wholeness and the life that God has to offer. But to do that, I need to say goodbye to my own life. To deny myself, to die to myself, that's faith, putting my faith in him. And then what I do to express that, I submit myself to baptism into Christ. The way Paul says is, don't you know that we were baptized into Jesus so that we can walk a brand new life? And if you're ready to make that decision today and say, I'm done with the lies of this world, and I'm ready to walk a new life filled with his Spirit, filling my life with things that are true and good and lovely and admirable. Then we're ready to help you this morning. We're going to stand and sing a song. I'm inviting you to come down here and have a seat and tell me, I'm ready to be God's person. And let us help you do that while we stand and sing this song.